Hey everyone, this is Adam, and welcome to episode 5 of The Power of Bold. What's up, everyone? This is Adam from New York City, and you're listening to the 5th episode of the podcast. I'm really excited for this episode, as we'll be hearing from an extremely interesting person that I've worked with the past several months. His name is Devin Martin, and he's a life coach in New York City. He's gone from dropping out of college to entering the corporate world, to going on a year-long retreat in North Carolina, to coming back to New York and helping individuals with major changes that they want to make in their lives. The theme of this episode is charting your own path, and in my discussion with Devin, we spoke about his upbringing, how he decided that college wasn't for him, how he dipped his toes into life coaching while working a 9-to-5 job, how he survived when living on a mountain by himself in North Carolina, and how he can fight fear when thinking about taking a career risk. We also spoke about the value of establishing a consistent meditation practice. Now, before we get started with the interview, I just wanted to disclose that I was a client of Devin's back in early 2017. It was a great experience, and it really helped me think about what I wanted out of my career and out of life. If you're stuck or want to make a life change, I'd really think about coaching, regardless of who it's with. And now, with that out of the way, let's get to the interview. We now welcome on Devin Martin, who's a renowned life coach in New York City. Devin has a number of accolades. He's a certified holistic health counselor, having studied health at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. He's a certified integral relationships professional and is a student of integral philosophy based on the work of Ken Wilber. He's also been meditating since he was a teenager, and he currently lives in New York City. So Devin, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you've had quite a story, and I'm thankful that you've taken some time out of your day to share it with us. And we're going to talk about your work as a life coach and tips for people who want to escape corporate America and try something new. But with that said, I'd first like to kind of start at the beginning by asking you about your childhood. So where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
I grew up, I guess technically a suburb of Boston in Ashland, Massachusetts. And I would say it was a stereotypical Northeastern liberal upbringing. I was in a small town, about 100 people in my class. I would say not that worldly of a town, a little bit too far outside of Boston to feel cosmopolitan. I don't think I connected with the community that much. I think I struggled to find my place in the world a lot because of that. I think I was exposed to too small of ideas and too few ideas, and was really excited, I think, in many ways to get out of my town. I was one of those kids who was thinking college was going to be great, or life after college was going to be great. And there was always this imagined time in the future when I was going to meet mentors and great inspiring people and do big things in the world. And I think I kind of fell into that trap of putting my happiness off until the situation changed. And that continued through college, and that continued through my career for a decade. And I think ultimately is what led me to help other people try to change their careers, other people who I think have fallen into a similar trap of just kind of taking what was offered to them and hoping that happiness would come later on.
Right, it's sort of the idea of the deferred dream, right? Like, if you do X, Y, and Z right now, you'll eventually become happy, and meanwhile, you have to put off your happiness right away.
Yeah, I had both of my parents were in education. They had 3 masters in education between them, and it was just a foregone conclusion that you go to college, and so at the age of 17 or 18, you pick what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And then, from college, you use that degree to get a good, stable job, working for a good company. And that all, that was basically the only path that I was given to success. And it felt wrong, but I was terrified to go against it and didn't really have a better option. And so, I went through 4 majors in 4 semesters before finally becoming incredibly depressed and dropping out.
Right. And so you were on this track for a certain number of years, but you felt like there was no way to escape it. Like, even though you may have thought on the surface, oh yeah, I could try this or that, it seemed like inertia was leading you to stay on that track. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, yeah. I think I've always been a little bit of an iconoclast at heart, but not that bold of one. So I wanted to, raise my middle finger to the system and run off and do something crazy, but I wasn't really that brave. And so I went to school for sound recording technology originally. I wanted to be a music producer, and didn't love the school I was at or the program I was in. And so I changed schools and I studied English, and then I studied sociology and psychology, and then I switched to philosophy for my last semester and took a bunch of 300 level classes in philosophy. And if you're a depressed atheist who feels like the world is becoming empty, studying postmodern philosophy is not a great idea. It's basically the study. If you look at anything deep enough, it falls apart.
Right.
And, it matched my mindset a little too much and left me quite empty. And so I dropped out of college really clueless, just really kind of gave up and decided to get a blue collar job. I just knew I didn't want to be in an office. I knew I didn't want to go to work every day and live the life that it appeared was being offered to me by getting a good degree and getting a quote unquote good job. And then the irony is that over the course of the next 10 years, that blue collar job turned into a corner office, consulting work, basically servicing corporate America. All of my clients, big Fortune 100 and federal agencies, and so I ended up being in that world anyways. It was almost like the gravity was too strong and I couldn't avoid it.
If I can go back to what you said about college, so you dropped out after, was it like a couple semesters?
2 years.
2 years, yeah. And so what was really the catalyst? Was it just a split-second decision, or did you even make like a pro or con list? Did you apply any framework to that?
It wasn't that rational and analytical. It was more, there was this small voice in my head saying, you don't belong here, you shouldn't be here. And it was saying that before I went, and it was just me eventually not being able to deny that voice any longer. I think, call it what you want. I think I now call it intuition, but it was very clear to me that my path was not going to be that conventional. And I just had to come to grips with it. And the way I came to grips with it, unfortunately, was by becoming a stoner and checking out of classes and, getting into music and ultimately getting really depressed and dysfunctional and just, failing at all my classes in the end because I wasn't showing up. And I think at one point I got mono and I didn't know it. And one of my friends in the dorm walked into my room and saw me sitting on the couch covered in sweat and said, "What's wrong with you, man? You look terrible." And it hadn't even occurred to me that I was that poor off. I was just feeling so shitty that I didn't even notice that I had mono. I thought I was just depressed and high. And I went to the infirmary, and they confirmed that I'd had mono for weeks, if not months. And then sometime after that, I just kind of admitted that I had no idea why I was in school. And I was actually, I guess the one rational thing is that I was running out of money. I had some money from my grandparents and my parents. And so I was about to start taking on debt to do God knows what. And it was a really tough decision. I remember I wrote my mother a really melodramatic letter saying basically, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I can't be here and I've got to leave. And then just didn't come back. Just basically said, I'm done and I'm not coming back.
Right. And at that point you were saying you were feeling depressed, you were feeling pretty low, yet you're running out of money. You knew you had to kick yourself into gear to find a job or start, sustaining yourself. So how did you really kick yourself into gear like that? Just because a lot of people that are down or depressed, they feel some sort of analysis paralysis, right? Like they feel like they should do something, but other things are holding them back. So what really spurred you to act after leaving?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the one decision that I made at the time that was actually empowering was that I basically said, that's it. I'm going to take back control over the information that enters my mind and the values that I assign it. I was essentially realizing that the educational system, the way it was handed to me, was making me miserable. It wasn't empowering me. I wasn't feeling like it was helping me become creative or design my own life. It was basically just feeding me information and asking me to regurgitate it. And in the process, destroying my passion. I'd been an incredibly passionate learner my whole life. I just loved, I mean, early on, I was really into math. Later on, I was getting into writing. I was really into music and philosophy and just figuring out how people worked had always been my passion. Psychology, sociology, religion. I've been studying all these things. And the more I did it within the context of a school, the less enthusiastic I became and the more depressed I became. It was all specialized and, it was just, I don't know, it didn't seem to cater to my natural curiosity. And so when I dropped out, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to self-educate. So all of the things that I studied in school and I stopped studying in school, I picked up as hobbies. Mm-hmm. And so I built a recording studio at my house. And for the next 10 years, I recorded bands. I produced my own music. I got really into philosophy in New York City, and I joined a philosophy discussion group, and then I ran it for a few years. I read voraciously on my own. And I also just kind of recognized that I needed to be less in my head. I was too much of an intellectual for my own good. I was making me depressed. And so I had a really strong instinct that I just couldn't be cooped up sitting in one place all day, and I wanted to work with my hands. So I got a blue-collar job where I was climbing ladders and drilling holes and crawling under houses, and my mind was my own, when I got home. And during the day, really, and I was exhausted. I think being depressed, one of the things that's the hardest is that when you have the least energy, you really probably need to struggle because it feels good to struggle and to overcome things, even just physically. Right. And then the other big breakthrough is that I have some Indian family, and I went to visit my uncle who's brilliant, and he recognized that I was depressed, and he handed me a book recommendation called Bang on the Door by Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, and he said, you should go check out one of these classes. And as a fourth generation atheist, I wasn't really open to spirituality or religion. But I took a class in breathing exercises, which led to a class in meditation. And I picked up a daily practice of that back right around then, probably around 20, actually. And that was transformative. That was a turning point in my life for learning how to grapple with depression.
Right. I do want to ask you about meditation just a little bit later. But going back to what you were saying, so you're working your 9-to-5 job, you're working your blue-collar job, working with your hands, and then at night you're engaging in your hobbies, you're producing music, you're studying philosophy, things like that. So like on the surface, when you're meeting someone for the first time or going to like a networking event or something, and someone asked you, the stereotypical question, "What do you do?" Like, how did you answer that, or did you feel successful when you were answering?
No, I hated myself. I said security systems, and I cringed, and it was just pathetic to me. I mean, my passion in life is dissolving boundaries and connecting people, and my job was literally defining boundaries and keeping track of who crossed them. I mean, it was, right. I was, if people didn't trust each other, it was good for business. It was, and it. I actually I floundered at one point, and I decided to go back to school. And I didn't have an undergrad degree, but I knew I couldn't do undergrad, so I decided to get a graduate degree. And the way I tried to get in was I instead of filling out an application, I made a website, and it was 2 columns, and one of them was my professional life, and the other one was my personal life and all my hobbies and spirituality and everything. And I basically said I want this degree to integrate the two. I want to stop saying I'm a security professional. I want to have a better answer for what I do. And I got in and I did one semester, and I still hated school, and I dropped out of that too. Right. But that led me to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition afterwards, where I started training as a health coach.
Got it. And so, yeah, you were kind of dipping your toes into life coaching, kind of starting as like a side hustle. Would you say that's right?
Yeah. So after I dropped out of grad school, where I was studying integral philosophy, I was just online, and I found the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And then I bumped into like 3 people in the next 2 days who had all been there and told me it was amazing. And I kind of realized that I had always been obsessed with everything it talked about. I mean, I was really into health and exercise and diet, but their philosophy is that career, exercise, relationships, and spirituality are primary foods, and the food you eat is secondary. And it's like when you're in love, you're not hungry. When you're wrapped up in a creative project, you can skip meals and you feel nourished by other things. And the key to being healthy is to recognize all the ways you can be nourished. So it was a very integrative philosophy. And so I just on a whim, sent them a check and paid for the tuition and decided to go. And then for the next 2 years, that was it was my side hustle. I would come home in the evenings, and instead of recording bands and doing things like that as much, I would take on clients and I would do health coaching.
So you kind of started the side hustle before it was cool, right? How everyone has one, and you were already doing it. And so at that time, you're doing these sort of things. You have clients for your life coaching side hustle, but then you decide to kind of totally go off the grid and go to a mountain in North Carolina. So can you talk about why you chose to do that, and what was the catalyst for that as well?
And back to your previous point, there was a point during those 2 years when it occurred to me that when somebody asked me what I do, I could say, I didn't use life coach yet, but I said I'm a health coach. And I got to say, I was shining. When I said it, it was just so much better. It was so much closer to my heart, and it felt more true. And I was less embarrassed to talk to people about what I was doing. But I still couldn't see the switch. I had a great job. I had a 6-figure salary. I had an office in the city that I went to a couple times a month, and I mostly worked from home in my underwear and traveled around the country visiting clients. And, it was objectively, everyone said I had it great, and I couldn't see how I could just drop that and suddenly have a thriving practice and keep my Williamsburg apartment and my nice dinners and my nice clothes and, all the crap that I was using to pacify myself because I didn't like my job. And the woman I was dating at the time dumped me. Wow. And that was a shock to the system. I'd never really been in love and dumped like that. And then a few months later, something snapped. I think I was just contemplating what I was doing in New York and why I was working and I just said, I quit. It just snapped. It was like a sudden decision. I've been thinking about it. These things happen over 10 years. And then all of a sudden it was the same thing. It was a little voice in the back of my mind saying, you should quit. And for years I've been thinking, if I ever get sick, if I get cancer, I'm just going to go live on a mountain somewhere, and I'm going to live a life of complete integrity. I'm going to eat the perfect food. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to study. I'm going to do all of these things that are life affirming that I believe in. And I realized I was probably going to give myself cancer trying to get an excuse to go do these things.
Right.
And so I quit my job. I shaved my head into a mohawk. I cut the sleeves off my dress shirts and went to Burning Man. And I sent a guy I'd never met a check for a year's rent on a cabin I'd never seen except for in pictures. And I moved to a log cabin on top of a mountain in North Carolina and just committed to not work for bare minimum 6 months. The goal was to get to 9 months or a year not working, but I was going to stay there no matter what. And I had no phone, no internet, no television, none of the comforts that would distract me from the pain of not knowing what I was doing. And I just engaged transformative work full time. That was my job.
Well, it's interesting. You said one of the catalysts is that you thought if you had cancer and you were looking back on life and what or if you had cancer, you would have thought, what would I be doing at this point if I only have a couple years left? And it seems like it's a pretty good framework to use if you're stuck in a position. You fast forward until like you're on your deathbed or something, and you look back and think, oh, what would I, in the ideal world, what would I do now, or what regrets would I have now if I hadn't done this in the past?
Yeah, I think now everyone talks about Steve Jobs. He had an intuition that he was going to die young, and he would wake up every morning and look in the mirror and say, "What would I do if it was my last day?" And
right.
It wasn't quite that dire for me, but there was an increased sense of urgency. Like, why am I fucking around with something I don't believe in? And when I do have something that it's not clear, but I do know that I do know there are things I should not be doing, and sometimes that's the best information you get, and you don't get the new ideas until you get rid of the things that are clogging up the system. And the Einstein quote was in my head, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it's essentially the level of consciousness that created a problem can't solve it. And so I just realized that I had to change. Before I could figure out what was next, I personally had to go through a transformation, and then I would probably start making better decisions. But first, I just had to get in integrity.
Right. Right, and so you do choose to go to North Carolina onto this mountain, and so the first couple of days were you thinking like, oh my God, what did I just do? This was such a mistake, or was it more, no, this is exactly where I need to be?
The first couple of days I was walking around with a knife in my hands because I was in the middle of the woods and there were wild animals and there were no people around, and I was 7 miles down a dirt road and my phone didn't work, and I was just like, oh my God, what? From New York City to literally the top of a mountain, nowhere, North Carolina. And then it took me a while because I didn't immediately just jump into this perfect lifestyle. I had the inertia, like my hand would reach down to my pocket because I felt a phantom vibration of my cell phone buzzing every like 5 minutes. It took me a while to desensitize that and just get out of the mindset of like, I better hurry up and get something done.
Right.
And then I sank into the mountain time and I started, I had a spreadsheet. I had journaling and dream journaling and meditating 2 to 3 hours a day and doing breathing exercises and chanting and yoga and running around naked in the woods and doing woodworking and just all of these things I was passionate about, playing music. I learned how to sing. I'd never learned how to sing.
So your day was pretty structured, though, it sounds like. You took on the day, emphasizing a certain number of hobbies or skills you wanted to learn. And so it kind of sounds like not exactly what you were doing in New York, but there was still some structure to what you were doing.
Yeah. I mean, I had my toe in this water a couple times. At one point, I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, actually, before 10 years ago, before 10 years before this, before I moved to New York City. I moved to a new city to take a job, and I didn't know anybody, and I decided I wasn't going to stay there. So I would wake up every morning, and I'd have an hour and a half of practice. And then most days I would come home after work, and I would have another hour and a half of practice. And it was this similar type of structure of physical exercise, stretching, breathing, meditation, and then maybe some deep reading. And so I had felt what it was like to engage serious practice in this manner, and I just wanted to go deeper. And my impulse was to still the waters. Like if consciousness is a pool of water, my sense was that every time I got an input, meaning like an email or a text message or talking to somebody even, it was like a pebble in the surface of the water. And all I could see was that top of the water. But I knew the work I needed to do was far, far deeper down. So I had to let things get still and quiet, and I had to make less decisions every day and just sink into my practices. And I think that's where the deep work was done.
Mm-hmm. And so was there even a significant moment when you were on that mountain where your thinking transformed like that and you found peace? Was there like one distinct moment that you remember?
There were a few just really beautiful moments, either in meditation or randomly throughout the day, which I think was the product of meditation, where there were, just a deep abiding bliss that was not circumstantial. I mean, I think what I think most people go to meditation for is stress reduction. And I think if you stick with it, what you get is the realization that happiness is not dependent on circumstances. It's actually the thing that exists beneath all of the circumstances. So it's who you are at your core before you add stress and anxiety and all these other things. And I think the more you realize that, the more free you are to play with what you're doing, because it's not ultimately that important. You can try something and fail, and your happiness doesn't fully depend on it when you know that who you are at your core is just fine.
Right. No, that's definitely interesting. And so from there, after a year, you focused on coaching full time. Is that right?
Yeah. So a woman I had connected with in the city who only coached women was reaching out to me over the course of the year saying, I've got these men. I don't coach men. I need a man to send it to. I think you're the guy. And so towards the end of the year, I got a landline installed. And I took on a few coaching clients, and I talked to them on the phone from North Carolina. And I just made the decision. I said, okay, this is it. This is what I have to do. I started designing my programs. I started designing my website. I started really figuring out who I was and what my approach was. And over the course of that year, the woman who dumped me and I had gotten back together, and we had a long distance relationship, writing love letters and handwritten in the mail. And she visited a few times, and I decided to come back to New York City and get her basically and drag her out of the city eventually. And so I came back to the city and moved back to Williamsburg with her and just committed myself to a full-time life coaching practice.
Oh, nice. So you actually did get her back then?
I did. 3 weeks before I went to the mountain, we had to be in the same place, and we spent some time together, and we ended up spending every day for the last 3 weeks before I left together. And it was a timing thing. We each had work to do, and the year away was perfect.
Right. And so from here, I kind of want to transition a little and just want to ask you about just coaching itself. And if you could just describe like the value of a coach, like in a meta sense. Like there are those that have thought about it but don't think it'll work, or they're worried about like costs or other things. So how would you address those concerns as well?
I mean, I think the most fundamental thing is similar to what you get out of therapy, which is that you're getting a perspective which is not your own. Therapy exists because we all have shadow. We have parts of ourselves that we can't see. The light of our consciousness doesn't go there. but other people can reflect it back to us. And so having somebody, and it's the same reason also that you have coaches in every other in sports or in the arts or increasingly in business, you need somebody who's not you, who doesn't have your perspective. And it's helpful if that person doesn't have history with you, in meaning they're not your family member, they're not in part of your business life, so they don't have preconceived ideas about who you are and what you can be, and they don't have needs of you. Most people around you, without even knowing it, kind of expect you to stay the way you are because their life is built around the expectations of who you've been, and for you to change too much can be threatening to them. So to bring in a trusted third party who maybe has had similar experiences, whose experience can actually be useful to you, can be incredibly powerful. And I think it's becoming commonplace among executives and people in finance, but now it's becoming more common amongst other professionals as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. And also for me, as you know, I was a client of yours. The thing that mattered most to me was accountability, right? Because you can even, like you say, consult your friends or family about certain tasks, but they love you, obviously love you unconditionally. And they may not be as hard on you as you really need to be in a specific situation or scenario. And
that's the big difference between coaching and therapy, or one of the main differences. Therapy is it's an environment of radical acceptance. Whoever you are, whoever you need to be, whatever you need to talk about, it's all good. And being in that environment and talking about difficult things like trauma can transform your emotional relationship to them. Whereas coaching requires somebody to be fairly healthy emotionally. And that, in the sense that you're ready to be pushed, you're ready to be challenged, and you're ready to be held accountable. I'm gonna have you write your goals down and share them with me, and I'm gonna have them in front of me every time we talk, and I'm gonna have notes from last time we talked, and I'm gonna know what you were supposed to be doing, and I'm gonna ask you how it went. And that, just somebody paying attention and holding you accountable, that alone is transformative.
Right. And so this podcast, I created it kind of for people like me who wanted to chart our own paths by taking a risk and trying something new, like what you did as well when you were younger. But then for some reason, things hold us back. And the most prominent example in my mind is people that, want to take a risk by leaving a corporate America to do something on their own. And yeah. I mean, I was in that position. I know a lot of people are as well. And so what do you think is the most common reason that people are held back, and why do people fail to actually act?
I mean, I think the simple reason is fear of the unknown. It's especially true, funnily enough, amongst the most successful people. There's a thing where if you're really good at school, if you get in, in high school, you get into the best college, and if you're really good at college, you get some of the best job offers, and if you're really good at that, you move up quickly. And what you're doing is you're thriving within a defined container. The parameters of success are handed to you. And if you're good at checking the right boxes, then you can do incredibly well. And walking away from that doesn't just mean be successful in something else. It often means you have to now define the parameters of success for yourself. And that's just not a skill that people are handed very often. You're told, like, this is the best school, you should want to go to that school, and here's what you do to get into that school, and here are the best jobs. And no one says, how do you define meaning? What's the impact you want to have on the world? What does a life well lived mean for you personally? And so that's a whole other capacity. And these tend to be incredibly intelligent people who can figure these things out. It's just not a muscle that they've built. And it's often the opposite. It's often an atrophied muscle. In order to survive in these environments, you have to deny a lot of your impulses. A lot of workaholics, I consider to be people who have given up on their hobbies and their health and their spirituality and their social circles in order to survive in this very narrow way. And now they're eventually, sometimes they get the money and they realize the money didn't make me happy. Shit, why am I doing this? But what is this? This isn't something I'm passionate about, but I've invested so much. How do I go back? And I think most people are undervalue what they've done and the capacities they've built and how much they can translate into other things.
Right. And so if people understand that they've taken some time to do some self-analysis, they've, gone on vacation or something, or reflected on their current situation, if they understand there's a problem, they even understand the fear, they understand what exactly is holding them back, yet they still refuse to act or refuse to take any action. And so what would you recommend for those people? Would you recommend even just the simplest step, or what exactly should they do?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the individual. Sometimes it's baby steps. I think for some people, like, it's exploring something, taking a class, joining a community, trying to convince yourself that, yes, this is the thing I want to be doing. And then, like I had a side hustle. I think for some people that can be the way to go. For some people, it's just getting them to take a leap. There are times when you can't go incrementally, when you have to go big. You walked away from an amazing job. There wasn't absolute clarity about your next steps. You were too consumed by the job. I think that's true for a lot of people. You're working not just 40 or 50, but 60, 70, 80, 100-hour weeks. There's no room to get in touch with something else. And so it's generally creating that space in your life. And if you can't do it in small steps, then it has to sometimes just be a leap of faith.
Right. You just have to take some action sometime. Otherwise, it's probably never going to happen.
Yeah.
And so on your website, you also have a blog post about the power of visualization. And I think you call it playing back the tape. And I think Michael Phelps is actually kind of most known for doing this. And so, while it sounds pretty intuitive, can you explain to the listeners kind of what you mean by this and the best way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a way of reprogramming your sense of what is real and what is possible. I think we all have, subconscious or conscious tapes that we play. We have these images in our mind of who we are and what we're doing and what we should be doing. And the problem is simply that you didn't create that tape. You didn't sit down and write a script and decide what to install. And it's not like it just naturally occurred there. You inherited it. You were given it from teachers or friends or society at large. And so because we're conscious beings, we can pause and say, what do I want this tape to be? And it can be as simple as, shifting your daily habits, just like seeing yourself waking up early, seeing yourself exercise and meditate and be aware of how you're spending your time, to drastic, like, okay, I can see myself walking into my boss's office and quitting my job. And I think sometimes we just have to visualize that over and over and over again until we believe it's true. And when we believe it's true, well, then it just doesn't make any sense not to be acting that way. And I think this is universal. You'll find, Will Smith talking about writing himself a check for millions of dollars. Or I'm sorry, what's his name? Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Oh, Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
Conor McGregor is getting in the news a lot right now, and he talks about he spends all of his time visualizing his success before he has it. And I don't think it's that these are just naturally talented people who happen to have the visions. I think the vision is a huge part in their preparation and getting them to practice and getting them to do the hard work and making them feel confident enough to put themselves out there and try hard things. And so I think once you design that, you play it. You spend time choosing what's running through your head as opposed to just being programmed by, media and people around you.
Right, and isn't that the idea that they talk about in The Secret, the book, and I think they made a movie out of it? Just the idea, if you keep visualizing.
And I think life coaches have to be careful because there's some truth in The Secret and there's a whole lot of nonsense in The Secret. And I think the truth is that if you focus on something, you will tend to notice it if it's around you. And so if you're looking for the person who hates you and you run around the world looking for people judging you, then you'll feel judged. And if you run around the world looking for people who are curious and intrigued by you, you'll find those people as well. I think The Secret claims that you create your reality, that you will actually manifest these people into existence, which is a little bit self-absorbed and ridiculous to me. But I think there's a lot of truth in that your consciousness does shape your experience of reality.
Right. And I do want to just briefly here, with a few minutes we have left, just talk about meditation and breathing exercises. And so you talked about it earlier in this episode. We've all seen the studies of how a regular meditation, mindfulness practice can help us focus and be calm in stressful situations. But then there's also the counter arguments that, I don't have enough time in the day. I doubt that it works. I can't really see myself sitting cross-legged in my apartment, these sort of things.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to the doubts that people have, and how can they really get started?
Yes. Some wiser person than me once said, if you don't have enough time in the day to be meditating, then you can't afford not to do it.
Right.
And I think there's many reasons. One of the reasons I found is that when I did TM, transcendental meditation, 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night, I would tend to sleep an hour less and be better rested. So it actually created time because it is deeply restful. But I think the more important factor is just that it makes you more efficient, and it removes a lot of the wasteful thinking that slows down your decision-making process, and it calms your nerves. And, and there's just so many ways to get started right now. I mean, you can go on a retreat for 10 days. You can take a 2-hour class. You can take a week-long class. You can get an app on your phone. You can go to Mindful, this space in the city, which is like, going to a gym. There's just endless ways to get started. And to me, if you're paying attention, the evidence is so overwhelmingly clear in one direction that you'd be ridiculous not to at least experiment.
Right.
I don't think anyone should adopt it as a lifestyle having not tried it. But I think if you pay attention to everything from the thousands of years of tradition to the science now emerging to, the people on the news talking about it, then it's really clear that something positive happens. And I like I said, I think it ranges from really simple stress reduction to radical transformation to really finding a completely different source of happiness than you've spent your whole life believing existed.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of people, I think, do understand the benefits, and I definitely do. I try to do it as much as I can. But it seems like sometimes if you do it for a couple of days, then you kind of die off a little. You miss it for the next couple of days. So do you have any tips on how people can remain consistent in order to do it there?
Yeah, take LSD.
There you go.
No,
yeah.
I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think it's true that if you look at serious meditators, people in monasteries and just people who have a daily practice, they quite often had a peak experience, which gave them an insight into what is possible for the mind. And that can happen walking in the woods. It can happen at church. It can happen at a concert. It happens most reliably probably on psychedelics. But you get a glimpse of something. And then the only way to sustainably and safely access that is through practice. And so I think a lot of people need some kind of clue as to what's possible, or else they're just not going to take the long, slow journey, because it is a long, slow journey. And so I think inspiration is one part of it. And then community is another part of it. It's really hard to meditate in New York City, I find, because it's such a frenetic place. Mm-hmm. But if you sit in a room with 50 other people or 5 other people who are still, it seems to help hold the space for you. And I think there's a reason why we have these places, these retreat centers, and we have for ages where people go and do this together. It makes it easier. They somehow carry some of the weight for you. And so I think that the only problem with all the apps is that it's isolating and you don't get a sense of community, which also provides a sense of accountability and support and context. It's one thing to do the practice. It's another thing to understand it and approach it in the correct way and have a teacher guide you along the path. And so I think the danger is that you expect just to be able to suddenly sit at home and be still and quiet for an hour and not fidget, and
yeah, and I think that's what most people envision. That's what they think they should be doing. And meanwhile, there are these other options out there that are probably better uses of your time almost, right? It'll make the experience better.
And the other thing I would say is a lot of people get the idea that they're supposed to sit down and immediately stop thinking. And that's not true. In a certain sense, your brain never stops thinking. That's just what it's there to do. It's like saying my nose didn't stop smelling. The point is you don't always pay attention to what your nose smells. If there's something important in the room, your nose is going to go, hey, check it out. There's a fire. There's some flowers over there. Go smell them. And your brain's the same way. It's mostly just churning anxiously, looking for problems, and none of it's that important. And so what you learn is to pay attention to where your attention is going. And so if you're sitting and you notice, I'm thinking, that's the point. That's like doing a rep in weightlifting. What you've just done is increase your capacity to witness where your attention is going and choose to change where your attention is going. So the more often you can notice that you're thinking, the more benefit you're getting during meditation.
Right. I think that's a really interesting point. A lot of people, like we were implying, just think, I need to totally clear my mind. Just picture like a blank room or something like that. And meanwhile, that's not what you really should be doing.
No, I mean, I think it's really important to learn how to focus. Most people can't focus very well. It's partly cultural. It seems to be everyone's got ADD these days, but I think the extreme stimulation in our environment makes it hard to have a single point of concentration. But it is a muscle. It is something you can train. And every time you meditate, I think it gets a little bit stronger if you're constantly bringing your attention back to the thing you're focusing on, like your breath or a mantra. It is a capacity that builds with time. And then that applies to everything else you're doing. You start to be able to get into the zone and get into flow states more readily at work, at play, in bed, no matter what you're doing. it's building a muscle that applies to the rest of life and increases your enjoyment of nearly everything.
Right. Right. And finally, I'd like to ask you just one more question here. If you could kind of give yourself advice now to your 20 or 25-year-old self, what exactly would that be?
I've always struggled with questions like this because I like my life right now. And I'm a little worried if I changed anything, including the ridiculousness and the suffering, I wouldn't be where I am. And I don't generally regret any of the horrible, painful things I've done. I think I would probably say trust your heart, and the 20-year-old me would laugh and think I was a metaphysical idiot. But hearing my future self say it would be forced to explore a little bit. And I think that's generally my advice to most people I work with on some level is get out of your head and trust your heart.
Right. And yeah, with that said, we'll wrap it up. So Devin, thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And actually, one more thing, if listeners want to connect with you or learn more about you, where can they exactly go?
Lifestyleintegrity.com is my website. I'm on Twitter at flow_coach. And yeah, I think those are the best places to find me.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much, Devin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
So thanks again for listening to my conversation with Devin Martin. I think his life story is really interesting, and he offered some important insights for those of us who are looking to make a change in our lives. You can visit thepowerofbold.com to view the show notes and more information about this episode. And if you like what you're hearing, I'd appreciate if you can subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you next time.